In a time of shifting powers and growing unrest, there was a town marked by its dark secrets and the scars of past wars. The town square was an ordinary sight. But today, something extraordinary was about to unfold. Sheriff Duncan, a man known for his iron will, stood next to the wooden platform in the heart of the square. What appeared to be a typical market day soon turned into a spectacle, a trial, and an unexpected turn of fate. "What's happening, Mama?" A young girl named Georgina whispered. Her curiosity piqued as she stretched on her toes to peer over the crowd. "Hush, Georgina," her mother, Marion, murmured, her voice filled with unease. The crowd around them was buzzing with a strange excitement, an ugly anticipation that made Marion feel like her skin was crawling. At the center of the scene, a large, imposing figure stood shackled in iron. The prisoner, a man of considerable strength and stature, was a sight to behold. His clothes, once fine, hung in tatters, and the bruises and wounds on his body were a testament to the cruel treatment he had endured. "Behold," Sheriff Duncan's voice boomed, carrying easily over the crowd. "A northern raider caught stealing from the king's lands. His people have 3 days to ransom him. Today marks the 3rd day, and no gold has come," the crowd murmured, some with excitement, others with fear. Duncan's voice rang again. "The law demands restitution, 6 silver coins and damages to the crown, or this man's service until the debt is paid. Who will bid?" Marion felt herself being drawn forward, something pulling her towards the prisoner. The man stood tall despite his injuries, his piercing blue eyes scanning the crowd with a cold calculation. "As strong as an ox," Duncan continued, his voice taunting. "Think of the work you could get from him." But all Marion could think of was the prisoner's quiet dignity amidst his pain. The crowd continued jeering, throwing stones at him. A young apprentice, emboldened by the mob's energy, picked up a rock and hurled it at the prisoner. It struck his shoulder, and the man flinched. The crowd cheered, and Marion's stomach turned. She clenched her fists, unable to look away from the prisoner's eyes filled with pain, dignity, and quiet defiance. 4 silver coins, Duncan announced, lowering the price. Still, no one responded. Behind the prisoner's stoic expression, Marion saw a person suffering, a man trying to hold on to his humanity in the face of degradation. Something stirred in her heart. The healer in her couldn't stand by. She had the means to help. Marion reached for the coins in her purse, feeling her hands tremble as she counted them out. 2 silver coins. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. She stepped forward, pushing through the crowd. 2 silver coins, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The crowd fell silent, and all eyes turned to her. Duncan's face flushed red. "Marion," he said, his voice controlled but seething with anger. "I forbid this. You cannot." But Marion was resolute. "I claim him according to the law." Duncan gritted his teeth and snatched the coins from her hand, but the law was clear. With no other choice, he reluctantly agreed. "Go on then," Duncan spat. "But don't come crying to me when he murders you in your sleep." Marion climbed the steps to the platform, where the prisoner's cold blue eyes locked with hers. The man, though injured, was still tall and imposing, but something in his gaze softened as she approached. "Can you walk?" Marion asked quietly, her voice filled with uncertainty. The man furrowed his brow and spoke for the first time, his words a strange, melodic language Marion didn't understand. "Gaelic," Marion murmured to herself, realizing she had just purchased a Highland prisoner. As they left the square, Marion could feel the weight of the town's hostility following them. George, her daughter, bounced beside her, unaware of the tension in the air. "Ask him if he's really been to the Great Locks," George said, her voice filled with excitement. Marion's heart sank. What was she doing? What would she do with this man? They reached the edge of the town and began the walk toward Marion's small cottage. The prisoner, though larger than she had expected, was struggling with his injuries. As they walked, Marion noticed how his breathing became more labored with each step. "Almost there," Marion whispered to him. But the prisoner stopped, his eyes fixed on her cottage and the forest beyond. He seemed to hesitate, as if calculating his chances of escaping. "You can go," Marion said quietly. "If you want to leave." For a moment, the prisoner stared at her, his eyes flicking to the forest and then back to her. But after a long pause, he turned toward the trees, his body trembling with exhaustion. Before he could move further, his legs buckled, and he collapsed to the ground. It took all of Marion's strength to help the prisoner into her cottage, where she laid him on the floor. The fire crackled softly in the hearth as she studied his wounds under the better light. His shoulder wound was unlike anything she had ever seen. The flesh around it was discolored, streaked with black veins that looked like poison. "He is dying," Marion realized with chilling clarity. Marion worked tirelessly, using every herb and remedy her grandmother had taught her. The prisoner, despite his injuries, remained unconscious, his breathing shallow but steady. As the night wore on, Marion began to notice something strange happening to herself. The ache in her chest was growing stronger, as if something deep within her was shifting. "Why does it feel like this?" she whispered to herself. But for now, she focused on the man in front of her. The prisoner, this Highland warrior, needed her help, and Marion would give everything she had to make sure he survived. The morning after the long night of tending to the Highland prisoner, Marion awoke feeling more drained than ever. Her body ached from the constant effort of tending to his wounds, but there was something else, an unsettling sensation that had been growing since the moment she first laid eyes on him. She had heard tales of the Highland clans, of warriors who fought with a ferocity unmatched by anyone south of the border. But there was something different about him. Despite his brutal past and the apparent strength he wielded, there was a vulnerability about him that Marion couldn't ignore. She rubbed her eyes and sighed, her body exhausted from the late-night vigil. But when she looked across the room, she saw him still lying on the floor, his massive form barely stirring. His breath was still shallow but steady, a sign that he was holding on. It was as if he had become a part of the very room itself, silent, still, and waiting. Marion knelt beside him, checking his wounds once again. The strange discoloration on his shoulder had begun to recede, but there was still a disturbing mark on his chest, spreading like a poison she couldn't fully understand. As she applied another poultice to the wound, she felt a presence behind her. Her heart skipped a beat. "You're awake," she said softly, not looking up from her task. His eyes flickered open, those piercing blue eyes that seemed to pierce straight through her. He shifted slightly, trying to sit up, but Marion immediately moved to support him. "You shouldn't move too quickly," she cautioned, her voice gentle but firm. The man nodded, his face showing appreciation but also a deep-seated pain that Marion could sense. She placed her hand gently on his chest, trying to steady him. "I'm Marion," she said, her voice quieter now, softer, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "Can you understand me?" The prisoner's lips parted slightly as if to respond, but then he hesitated, his brow furrowing in confusion. The language barrier was still there, but Marion could see that his eyes held something deeper, a recognition, a connection. "You speak Gaelic," Marion said, more as a statement than a question. "But I cannot speak it. Do you understand my words?" There was a flicker in his eyes, something she hadn't seen before, an understanding, a flicker of hope. Then, with a voice that was hoarse and rough from days of captivity, he whispered, "I understand." Marion's heart skipped at the sound of his voice. It was low and soothing, almost like the wind over the Highlands. The way he spoke was mesmerizing. "You're safe," she said quietly, her hand still resting over his chest. "You're going to be okay." Days passed in a blur of healing and quiet moments. Marion tended to the prisoner with a care that surprised even herself. Despite the tension that existed between them, something unspoken had begun to grow between them. It wasn't just the wounds that were healing. Something deeper was shifting in the air. One evening, while she was preparing the herbs for his nightly treatment, the man's gaze lingered on her. Marion caught him staring at her in the corner of her eye, and she felt her face flush slightly. "What is it?" she asked, still focused on grinding the herbs in her mortar. "I cannot remember," the man said slowly, his voice almost too soft to hear. "What do you want with me?" The question hung in the air, heavy and profound. Marion paused for a moment, turning to face him. The weight of his words pressed on her chest like an anchor. "I want to help you," she said simply. "I don't know what you've been through, but I can help you heal." His eyes narrowed slightly, but there was no anger there. Instead, there was a depth of understanding, a recognition of something more than what was on the surface. "You're a healer," he said, his voice filled with a strange kind of reverence. "But you are not just that." Marion blinked, surprised by the depth in his words. She had spent years training with her grandmother, learning how to heal wounds and ease suffering. But there was something about this man, something in his eyes, that made her feel like there was more to her gift than what she had known. "I don't understand," she murmured. "You will," the man said, his voice steady, though filled with mystery. "It is not just healing you do, It is something much older, much more powerful. One evening, as Marion was tending to the fire in the hearth, she felt a presence standing at the door. The familiar tension rose in her chest, and she glanced over her shoulder to see the prisoner standing there, watching her silently. "I need to speak with you," he said, his voice firm but gentle. Marion hesitated for a moment, but then she nodded. "Come, sit. You're still too weak to be standing." He didn't move, though. Instead, he stood there, his piercing eyes focused on her, as if trying to decide whether or not to speak. "Why did you save me?" he asked suddenly, his voice low and steady. "You don't owe me anything. Why risk your life for someone like me?" Marion felt the heat rise in her cheeks. She turned away, busied herself with preparing another batch of medicine, though her hands trembled slightly. "I saw you," she said quietly, "and I knew I couldn't let you die. You may be a prisoner, but that doesn't mean you deserve to suffer." The man's eyes softened as he stepped closer to her, but then he paused, unsure. "You don't fear me?" he asked, his tone tinged with disbelief. Marion looked up at him, meeting his eyes for the first time. "No, I don't. I don't know why, but I don't." His expression flickered, a mixture of confusion and understanding. The moment stretched between them, heavy with something neither could fully name. "Why did you buy me?" he asked again, this time with a hint of something else, a quiet hope. Marion swallowed hard. "Because I couldn't leave you to die. I saw what they did to you, and I knew I had to help." The prisoner took a step closer to her, and for the first time, Marion didn't flinch. Instead, she stood her ground, feeling an unfamiliar pull toward him. "Thank you," he said softly. "You saved me, and I won't forget it." Days turned into weeks, and the quiet connection between Marion and the prisoner deepened. Though they could not communicate perfectly, there was a bond between them that neither could deny. It wasn't just the physical healing that was happening, it was something more. The prisoner, whose name Marion had learned was Euan, grew stronger each day. His wounds slowly healed, and the strange marks on his body faded, though the mystery surrounding them remained. One night, while Marion was preparing dinner, Euan sat by the fire, staring into the flames. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in the air between them, something unspoken, something that Marion couldn't ignore. "Euan," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. "You've been through so much. I want to know more about you, about where you come from." He didn't answer right away, but after a long pause he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I am from the Highlands. My people are warriors, men and women of strength and honor," he said, his voice tinged with pride. "But there is more to us than that. We are bound by something ancient, something powerful." Marion sat down beside him, intrigued by his words. "What do you mean?" He turned to face her, his eyes filled with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "You'll understand in time," he said cryptically. "But first, we must survive. Together." As time passed, the connection between Marion and Euan became undeniable. Each day, they learned more about each other, not just through words, but through gestures, silent exchanges, and shared moments. Marion, a healer by trade, was drawn to his strength and his unyielding will to survive, even after everything he had endured. But there was something deeper, something inexplicable that tied them together. Euan, in turn, found himself increasingly reliant on her care. But it wasn't just the physical healing he sought. There was an emotional comfort in Marion's presence. She was unlike anyone he had ever known, gentle, compassionate, yet fierce when needed. One evening, as the first stars began to appear in the sky, Marion found herself sitting beside Euan at the edge of the forest. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, and the stillness of the night was only broken by the sound of distant wolves howling in the distance. Euan was staring into the woods, his jaw clenched, as though he were struggling with something deep inside himself. "Is everything all right?" Marion asked softly, her voice carrying the weight of concern. Euan didn't immediately respond. He seemed lost in thought, his brow furrowed. Marion watched him for a moment, sensing the internal battle he was fighting. "I can't stay here," Euan finally said, his voice low and heavy. "I can't be a burden to you, Marion. You've done enough. I owe you my life, but I cannot take any more from you." Marion's heart ached at his words, and she reached out to gently touch his arm. "You're not a burden, Euan. You don't understand. But Euan cut her off, his eyes filled with an intensity that Marion hadn't seen before. "You don't know what I am, Marion. What I carry. My people, We're not like other men. There's a reason I've been marked. A reason I'm here. I carry the weight of a curse, a legacy of violence, and I don't want to drag you down with me." Marion felt a shiver run through her, and she instinctively pulled her hand back, her mind racing. The fear and uncertainty in Euan's voice were palpable. He wasn't just talking about physical wounds, he was talking about something deeper, something that was tied to his bloodline, something that she wasn't sure she could fully understand. "I'm not afraid of you, Euan," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions churning inside her. "Whatever you carry, I'll help you with it. We'll face it together." Euan's eyes softened at her words, and he let out a long, heavy sigh. It was clear that his resolve was weakening, that Marion's words had broken through the wall he had built around himself. But even still, there was a deep sadness in his gaze. "You don't know what you're offering," he said quietly, his voice laced with sorrow. "But I don't deserve you, Marion. You're a healer. You've done enough for me already, and one day, you'll realize that." Marion shook her head, a fierce determination in her heart. "I won't give up on you, Euan. Not now, not ever." The days that followed were filled with moments of quiet reflection, as both Marion and Euan tried to make sense of the bond that had grown between them. Marion couldn't deny the growing feelings she had for him, even though she knew little about his past, his people, and the dark secrets he carried. One evening, after Marion had finished tending to his injuries, Euan stood at the edge of the forest, his back to her. He seemed lost in thought, staring into the darkening woods as the last rays of daylight faded away. Marion approached him cautiously, feeling the familiar pull in her chest, a pull she had begun to understand more and more each day. "Euan?" she called softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Euan turned, and for the first time, Marion saw something vulnerable in his eyes, a fleeting moment of uncertainty that disappeared just as quickly as it had appeared. "Marion," he said, his voice tight with something unspoken. "There's something I need to tell you. Something you need to understand." Marion's heart raced. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of his words before he even spoke them. "What is it?" she asked, her voice steady but her stomach twisting with anticipation. Euan hesitated, his eyes flickering with an inner conflict. "My people, we're not just warriors. We are bound by something much older. A curse, passed down through the generations. It's a blood bond, one that cannot be broken. And when I bit you..." He paused, as if unsure how to continue. Marion's heart skipped a beat. She had known there was something more to this connection between them, something beyond what she could explain. "When I bit you," Euan continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "I didn't just mark you. I claimed you. And now, you're bound to me, to my curse." Marion's breath caught in her throat, her mind racing as the pieces began to fall into place. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. Euan turned to face her, his eyes filled with regret and something deeper, something primal. "You'll understand soon enough. The bond we share, it's not just a simple connection. It's part of who we are. And once it's formed, there's no turning back." As the days turned into weeks, Marion found herself wrestling with the truth of Euan's words. The bond they shared, which had initially felt like a blessing, now felt like a heavy weight around her heart. She could feel it, an invisible tether that connected her to him, drawing her toward him, even when she tried to pull away. There were moments when she could see the truth in Euan's eyes, when the primal energy that flowed through him became evident in the way he carried himself, in the way his presence seemed to fill the room. He wasn't just a man, he was something more, something ancient, and it terrified her. But despite her fear, despite the uncertainty that loomed over their connection, she couldn't bring herself to walk away. She had made a promise to him, to help him, to face whatever darkness he carried, together. As the bond between Marion and Euan deepened, so too did the dangers that surrounded them. Euan's past was catching up to him, and the curse he had spoken of was beginning to take its toll. Marion could see it in the way his body grew weaker, in the way his eyes would flicker with something wild whenever he was close to her. And the wolves, they were always present, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Marion didn't know what Euan's people wanted, but she knew one thing for certain: they weren't going to stop until they had him. One night, as Marion sat by the fire, she heard a soft knock at the door. She stood, startled, and moved toward it, her heart racing in her chest. When she opened it, she found Euan standing there, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. "They're coming," he whispered urgently. "I have to leave." Marion stood frozen for a moment, staring at Euan, unsure of what to say or do. His words hung in the air like a shadow, and her heart pounded in her chest. "Who's coming?" she finally asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. She didn't want to hear the answer, but she knew she needed to. Euan's jaw tightened as he looked behind him, his eyes scanning the darkened woods. "My people. They'll never stop hunting me. They want me back, Marion. They want to force me to do things that I can't do. And if they find you—" He trailed off, his voice heavy with the weight of his words. Marion took a step forward, her hand instinctively reaching for his arm, urging him to stay. "Then we'll fight them. We'll stay here and fight." Euan shook his head, a mixture of frustration and sadness in his gaze. "You don't understand. This isn't just a fight, Marion. This is a war. And I can't ask you to fight it with me." Marion's heart ached at his words. The truth was, she was scared. Scared for him, for herself, and for everything they had built together in the short time they had known each other. But she wasn't about to let him face it alone. "You don't need to ask me," she said firmly, her voice full of resolve. "I'm with you, Euan. Always." Euan looked at her, his expression softening. He reached out, taking her hand in his, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Words didn't seem necessary. Their connection said everything that needed to be said. But the moment was fleeting. Euan pulled away, his gaze shifting to the shadows once more. "They're coming," he repeated. "We don't have much time." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Marion helped Euan gather what little he needed. A few provisions, some of her herbs, and whatever else could be of use in their escape. Every so often, she would look over her shoulder, half expecting to see figures emerging from the trees, but the night remained eerily quiet. The silence was suffocating, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. As they moved quickly through the forest, Marion felt the weight of the decision they had made hanging over her. They were leaving everything behind: her home, her daughter, her life as she had known it, and stepping into an unknown future. But as she looked at Euan, she knew it was the only choice she could make. She trusted him. She trusted their bond, even if it was something she didn't fully understand. "We have to go," Euan urged, his voice low and tense. "They'll be here soon." Marion nodded, her heart racing in her chest. She didn't know what was waiting for them, but she knew that whatever it was, they would face it together. By dawn, the woods were alive with the sounds of pursuit. Marion could hear the rustling of branches, the distant snap of twigs beneath heavy boots, and the faintest whisper of voices carried by the wind. Euan's pace quickened, and Marion had to struggle to keep up. Her legs were sore, and the weight of the pack on her back seemed to grow heavier with every step. But she refused to stop, refused to show weakness in front of Euan. He needed her now more than ever. "They're getting closer," Euan muttered, his eyes scanning the forest around them. "I can hear them." Marion nodded, feeling the urgency in his words. They were running out of time. Suddenly, Euan stopped. Marion almost bumped into him as he turned sharply, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the trees ahead. "Hide," he ordered. Without hesitation, Marion dropped to the ground, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the faint sound of footsteps growing louder. Closer, her breath hitched as she pulled her cloak tighter around her body, trying to blend in with the shadows. She watched as Euan silently moved into position, his body tense with anticipation. He was preparing for a fight, she realized. He didn't think they would make it out of this, and yet, he wasn't backing down. She admired that about him, his refusal to give up, no matter the odds. A few moments later, the figures emerged from the trees. There were at least 5 of them, all heavily armed and dressed in the same rugged attire that Euan wore. They were his people, and they looked like they meant business. "Euan," one of them called, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "You can't run forever. Come with us. It's not too late to save yourself." Euan stepped forward, his posture defiant. "I'm not coming back with you. I won't be your puppet any longer." The leader of the group, an older man with graying hair and a scar over one eye, laughed. "You're making a mistake, Euan. You're running away from your destiny. You belong to us. You always have." Euan shook his head. "Not anymore. I belong to no one but myself." The tension in the air was thick, almost unbearable. Marion could see the conflict in Euan's eyes, the struggle between his loyalty to his people and his desire to break free. She could feel it too. This was the moment where everything would change. "Euan, please," the older man said, his voice softer now. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." But Euan was resolute. I've made my choice. I'm not going back. Without warning, the men lunged at Euan, and the fight began. Marion's heart raced as she watched the brutal confrontation unfold. Euan fought with the strength and ferocity of someone who had nothing left to lose, his every movement precise and calculated. But even with his strength, there were too many of them. One of the men managed to get behind Euan, knocking him to the ground with a swift blow. Marion's breath caught in her throat as she saw Euan struggle beneath the weight of his attackers. Without thinking, she rushed forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't just stand there and do nothing. She had to help him. "Get off him!" she shouted, her voice filled with panic and fury. She grabbed a rock from the ground and hurled it at the men, hitting one of them in the shoulder. For a brief moment, the attackers hesitated, giving Euan the opportunity he needed. He quickly recovered, flipping one of them off of him and grabbing his sword. The battle raged on, but with each passing second, Marion's fear grew. She wasn't sure how much longer they could hold out. With a final, decisive blow, Euan sent the last of his attackers sprawling to the ground. He stood over them, panting, his body covered in sweat and dirt. "We need to go," he said urgently, turning to Marion. "Now." Marion nodded, her heart still pounding in her chest as they made their way deeper into the woods, their footsteps quick and heavy. The fight was over for now, but the danger was far from over. She could still hear the distant cries of the men behind them, the sound of their pursuit growing fainter but never fully disappearing. Euan didn't slow his pace. "We need to get to the border," he said, his voice grim. "Once we cross, they won't be able to follow us." Marion didn't question him. She trusted him. They both knew what had to be done. Marion's feet ached as they continued their trek through the dense forest. The thick undergrowth snagged her cloak and tripped her at every turn, but she didn't dare stop. Euan led the way with determination in his every step, never once looking back. The sound of their footsteps was the only noise in the stillness of the woods. The danger had not passed, but for the moment, they were safe at least for a while. The air was thick with the scent of pine and wet earth, and the weight of the night was starting to settle in. They had been running for hours, but Marion knew they couldn't stop now. The sun had set, and with it, the darkness seemed to cloak the forest, making the night feel more menacing. It was as if the forest itself were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. "We can't stop here," Euan muttered, his voice low and strained. "We need to find shelter. They'll be searching for us. We can't risk staying out in the open." Marion nodded, her exhaustion catching up with her, but she pushed it down, focusing on the task at hand. "Where can we go?" she asked, her voice hoarse from the long run. Euan's eyes narrowed as he scanned their surroundings. "There's an old cabin not far from here," he said. "It belongs to an old ally of mine. If we can reach it before they catch up." His words trailed off, but Marion understood. They had no choice. It was their only option. They had to reach the cabin. The wind howled through the trees, and the forest seemed to come alive around them. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of the leaves sent a jolt of fear through her. She could feel the weight of the chase behind them, the knowledge that they weren't truly safe. Not yet. "Come on," Euan urged, taking her hand and pulling her along. "We can make it." Hours later, the two of them reached the cabin. It was a small, weather-beaten structure, hidden deep within the forest, nestled between towering trees. The only sign of its existence was the faint glow of light spilling out from the cracks in the wooden walls. Marion's heart lifted as she saw the faint outline of the cabin's door. She couldn't believe they had made it. Euan knocked on the door 3 times, quickly and softly. Marion watched as his hand trembled slightly, and she realized how much he was holding in. They had been running for so long, pushing their bodies to the limit, and now, finally, they were here. They had made it. For a moment, it almost felt like a dream. A few moments later, the door creaked open, and an older man appeared, his face hidden in the shadows of the cabin. His eyes gleamed with recognition, and a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Euan," the man said, his voice raspy from disuse. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon. Come in, both of you." Euan stepped forward, pulling Marion with him. The man closed the door behind them and locked it securely. He turned to Euan, a look of concern crossing his face. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "What's happened?" Euan shook his head, his jaw tight. "We were followed. We need to stay here until we can figure out what to do next." The man nodded grimly. "You're safe here, but you know the risks. They'll be looking for you." They won't stop until they find you. Marion's heart sank as the weight of their situation became real again. They weren't safe, not yet. But they had a temporary haven, and that was all that mattered now. Marion collapsed onto a worn chair by the fire, feeling the exhaustion seep into her bones. She hadn't realized just how tired she was until she sat down. The warmth of the fire in front of her felt soothing, almost like a balm for her weary soul. She leaned back, closing her eyes for just a moment. The past few hours had been a blur of movement, of danger, of fear. But now, they had a moment of respite. Euan sat beside her, his shoulders tense as he watched the man move about the cabin, preparing food and making sure everything was in order. His brow was furrowed in concentration, and Marion could tell he was still processing everything that had happened. "We can't keep running like this," Marion said softly, breaking the silence. Her voice was hoarse, but she didn't care. She needed to speak, needed to voice her fears. "We need to make a plan." Euan turned to her, his face conflicted. "I know. I'm just trying to figure out the next move. We can't go back. We can't stay here forever." Marion looked at him, her heart aching. She understood the burden he was carrying. They both knew what was at stake. They couldn't keep running forever. They had to confront whatever was coming for them, but for now, they were safe. And that was enough. As the fire crackled, Marion and Euan sat in silence for a long while. The weight of everything they had been through, everything they had lost, hung in the air between them. They had come so far, and yet, the journey was far from over. "Euan," Marion began again, her voice steady now. "We need to talk. About what happens next." Euan sighed, rubbing his eyes as he leaned back in the chair. "I know. But I don't know if we're ready for that yet." "We don't have a choice," Marion replied, her tone firm. "The longer we wait, the harder it's going to get. We can't keep running forever. We need to make a stand." Euan met her gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of determination and fear. "I'm with you, Marion. Whatever comes next, I'll face it with you. But we need to be prepared. We need to know what we're up against." Marion nodded, knowing that he was right. They couldn't afford to keep running. It was time to face the truth. But even as they prepared for the battle ahead, one thing was certain: they would face it together. And for now, that was enough. As the days passed, Marion couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled in her heart. Euan, the Highlander she had saved from the auction block, remained at her cottage, healing from his injuries. Though he was physically recovering, the silence between them grew thick and heavy. Every time Marion looked into his startling blue eyes, she felt a pull, something primal that she couldn't explain. But it wasn't just the connection that troubled her. There was something else, a sense of danger that hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. One evening, as she sat by the hearth, tending to the fire, Euan appeared in the doorway, his figure framed by the flickering light. His gaze met hers, and for the briefest moment, something unspoken passed between them. He stepped forward slowly, cautiously, his movements deliberate. "You don't need to stay here," Marion said quietly, trying to break the tension. She wasn't sure why, but she felt an overwhelming need to push him away, to protect herself from whatever was brewing between them. Yuan's lips parted, but no words came out. He looked at her as if trying to read her, to understand her intentions. The air between them crackled with unspoken words and emotions neither could fully comprehend. "I don't want you here out of obligation," Marion continued, her voice softer now. "I helped you because I could. But that doesn't mean—" He cut her off by taking a step forward. "You're afraid," he said, his voice low and rich, like the rumble of thunder on the horizon. "Afraid of what's happening between us." Marion's heart skipped a beat, but she quickly steadied herself. "I don't know what you mean." Yuan's eyes softened, but there was a sadness there too, something darker that he wasn't ready to reveal. He turned and walked toward the window, his broad back to her. "I'm not afraid," Marion whispered, though she wasn't sure she believed her own words. "But we don't belong together. You're a Highlander. You belong to the wilds, to your people." He looked out the window, his face hardening. "I'm not just a Highlander," he said quietly. "I am more than that, and so are you." Marion watched him, her heart pounding. There was something undeniable in the way he spoke, something that made her want to step closer, to understand. But she couldn't. "I don't know what you mean," she said again, her voice trembling now. "I'm just a healer, nothing more." Euan turned back to her, his gaze intense. "You're more than just a healer. You've always known it." Days turned into weeks, and Marion's internal struggle only deepened. Euan continued to recover under her care, though the strange pull between them remained. There were times when she caught him watching her with that same, unreadable look in his eyes. And in those moments, something inside her stirred a longing she couldn't explain. One night, as she prepared a poultice for his wound, Euan spoke again, his voice soft but heavy with meaning. "I don't understand what's happening to me," he admitted. "There's a force pulling me toward you, and I can't fight it." "I don't know how." Marion turned to face him, startled by his admission. "What do you mean?" "You're healing. You'll be fine," but he shook his head. "It's not just my body that's healing, Marion. It's something else, something deeper. I feel it inside me, like an unshakable force." The room fell silent, the only sound the crackling of the fire. Marion's heart raced as she watched him, the weight of his words sinking in. There was something more to Euan than just the Highland warrior she had rescued. Something ancient and untouchable. "I don't know what this is," Marion whispered. "But I can't deny it. I feel it too." He stepped closer, his hand reaching for hers. "Then you know, Marion. You know we can't fight it. Not anymore." Marion's breath caught in her throat as his fingers brushed against hers. A spark of electricity shot through her body, and she felt herself drawn toward him, her heart beating in time with his. For a brief moment, it was as if the world faded away, leaving only the two of them, standing in the glow of the fire. But the moment was fleeting. Marion stepped back, her mind clouded with confusion. "I don't know what's happening," she said, her voice shaking. "I don't know what you are, or what this is between us." "I'm a man, Marion," Euan said softly. "A man who's found something he can't live without." Marion turned away, her mind racing. She couldn't deny the pull between them, but she was terrified of it. Terrified of what it meant for her life. She had never wanted anything more than to be left alone, to continue her healing work in peace. But this connection was beyond her control. She walked to the window, her hands pressed against the cool glass. "You need to leave," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You don't belong here. Not with me." Euan stood behind her, his presence a heavy weight in the room. "I do belong here," he replied quietly. "Because of you." Marion closed her eyes, her heart heavy with the burden of their unspoken connection. She had tried to push him away, but the truth was, she didn't want him to leave. The days that followed were filled with a quiet tension. Marion continued her work as a healer, but her mind was never far from Euan. She could feel his presence even when he wasn't near, and it unsettled her. One evening, as the sun began to set, Euan came to her again. This time, there was no words between them, only the unspoken understanding that had been growing between them for weeks. He reached for her, his hand gentle as it cupped her face. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. The world outside, the cottage, the fear, everything faded away. There was only Euan, and the warmth of his touch. "I don't want to lose you," he murmured, his forehead resting against hers. Marion's breath hitched in her throat. She had never been more afraid in her life, but at that moment, all her fear seemed small, insignificant. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to find out. "I don't want to lose you either," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The next day, the reality of their situation hit Marion harder than ever. Euan had stayed the night, something neither of them had spoken of, but the tension in the air was palpable. As he walked through the cottage, his presence felt like a storm waiting to break. "I can't keep doing this," Marion said, her voice trembling. "I can't keep pretending like nothing's changed." Euan turned to her, his expression unreadable. "I'm not asking you to pretend, Marion. I'm asking you to accept what we are." But Marion couldn't. Not yet. She was torn between the fear of the unknown and the undeniable pull she felt toward him. What would this mean for her life as a healer? Would she have to give up everything she had worked for? "I don't know what this is," Marion whispered, her heart breaking with the words. "But I know I can't lose myself in it." Euan stepped closer, his hand resting on her shoulder. "You won't lose yourself, Marion. You'll gain something you never expected." The next morning, Euan was gone. Marion woke to find his absence more profound than she had ever imagined. She couldn't explain it, but something inside her broke as she realized he had left without a word. She hadn't been ready to admit it, but in his leaving, she had lost a part of herself. The days that followed were filled with an aching emptiness. Marion continued her work, but it felt like she was going through the motions. Euan had taken something with him when he left, something she hadn't even known she had to give. As she walked through the woods one evening, gathering herbs for her next remedy, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, her heart racing, hoping against hope. There he was, Euan. But this time, there was no hesitation in his eyes, no question of what they were. "I'm not leaving again," he said quietly, his voice filled with certainty. Marion took a step toward him, her heart pounding in her chest. "You don't have to leave," she whispered, "but I can't promise I'm ready." Euan smiled, his eyes softening. "You don't have to be ready. You just have to trust me." And for the first time, Marion did. Marion woke the next morning with a newfound sense of determination. She had no idea where this would all lead, but she couldn't deny the connection between her and Euan anymore. The past few days had been filled with doubt and fear, but now, with him standing before her once more, everything seemed clearer. Euan, despite his powerful presence, had never been as open as he was now. He stood beside her, no longer distant or lost in his own thoughts, but present, completely present. "I've made a decision," Marion said, turning to face him. Her voice was steady, though her heart raced with a mix of fear and anticipation. "And what decision is that?" Euan asked, his tone serious yet curious. "I'm going to trust you," Marion replied. "I've been running from this for too long. From you, from what I feel. But I can't keep pretending." Euan stepped closer, the space between them closing with every word she spoke. "You don't have to pretend anymore, Marion. I'm not going anywhere. This is where I belong, where we belong." Marion hesitated for a moment, but then the knot in her chest loosened. She stepped forward, her hand finding his. The moment their fingers touched, everything shifted. The tension between them seemed to dissolve, and for the first time in weeks, Marion felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. It didn't take long for the reality of their connection to hit Marion full force. Euan didn't need words to communicate with her. Every glance, every touch, spoke volumes. It was as though the very air around them was charged with a magnetic pull, drawing them closer. One evening, while they were out gathering herbs, a sudden noise caught their attention. Marion tensed, her instincts kicking in. Euan immediately stepped in front of her, his body a shield, his eyes scanning the surrounding forest. "There's something here," Marion whispered, her voice tight with apprehension. "Stay close," Euan instructed, his voice low and commanding. Before she could react, a shadow darted through the trees. Marion's heart pounded as she followed Yuan's gaze. The wild had always been unpredictable, but this felt different, darker. Euan turned to her with a grave expression. "We need to leave, now." But before they could make a move, a group of figures emerged from the shadows, surrounding them. Marion's blood ran cold. They were not alone. The tension in the air was palpable. The figures that had emerged from the forest were not human. Marion's eyes widened in disbelief as she realized what they were. Wolves. But not ordinary wolves. They were larger, more powerful, and their eyes glowed with an eerie amber light. Euan stepped in front of Marion again, his posture protective but still calm. "They are part of my pack," Euan said, his voice steady. "They've come to test you." Marion's heart skipped a beat. "Test me?" Euan nodded. "It's a tradition among my people. To join the pack, one must prove themselves." Before Marion could process his words, one of the wolves growled, its gaze fixed on her. The pack leader, a massive silver-gray wolf with eyes that matched Yuan's, stepped forward. "You must face us," the leader said, his voice not human but carrying an ancient authority. Marion felt her pulse race as the wolf's gaze bore into her. Euan stepped aside, his eyes never leaving the pack leader. "Do not be afraid," Euan said softly. "You've already proven yourself in ways you don't understand yet." The wolves closed in, their movements fluid and calculated. Marion stood frozen, unsure of what to do. She didn't know how to prove herself to these creatures, to this world that was now so intertwined with her own. But then, something inside her clicked. It wasn't fear she felt. It was something stronger. It was a call to action, to face the challenge head-on. With a deep breath, Marion stepped forward, meeting the pack leader's gaze. She wasn't just a healer. She was something more. She had always known it. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firm. The challenge was set. Marion wasn't sure what to expect, but she could feel the power of the pack, the raw energy that flowed between them. The test began, and Marion found herself fighting not just for acceptance but for her own sense of self. The wolves moved swiftly, testing her strength, her resilience, and her connection to the wild. She had never faced anything like this before, but with each challenge, she found herself tapping into something deep within her, a primal instinct she hadn't known she possessed. As the test continued, Marion's body moved with surprising grace, her mind sharp and focused. She wasn't just proving herself to the wolves, she was proving something to herself, that she could do this, that she could survive in this world of magic and wolves. The leader of the pack watched her closely, his amber eyes filled with approval. After what felt like an eternity, the test ended. The wolves retreated, their gazes lingering on Marion, now filled with respect. "You have passed," the leader said, his voice like the rumble of thunder. "You are one of us." The days that followed were filled with a quiet understanding. Marion had earned her place in the pack, but the real challenge was just beginning. She was no longer just a healer. She was part of something much larger. She was bound to Euan, bound to the pack, and to a world she had only begun to understand. Euan remained by her side, his presence a constant source of support. They spoke little, but their bond deepened with every passing moment. Marion felt it in her bones. The pull between them was undeniable, a connection that was as ancient as the forest itself. One evening, as they stood together under the stars, Euan turned to Marion, his expression soft but serious. "We are bound, Marion," he said, his voice steady. "And nothing will break that bond. Not the pack, not the wild, not even time." Marion looked into his eyes, the weight of his words sinking in. She had never been more certain of anything in her life. "We're in this together," she whispered, her voice filled with conviction. Euan smiled, a rare, genuine smile that made Marion's heart flutter. "Together," he agreed, and with that, they turned toward the future, knowing that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you want to hear more captivating tales, don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, for those who prefer to listen on the go, you can find all my stories on Spotify under the name Lily's Romance Library. A special thank you to everyone following the journey. Your support truly means the world to me.